Welcome to Design for Outcome podcast, where we talk about UX design and research strategies to have more impact on your business. My name is Frauke. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to my podcast. In today's episode, I want to give you 5 practical methods and exercises that you can use to improve your impact as a UX designer. I've been working in this industry since many years, and for the last couple of years, I've also been teaching and mentoring UX designers. And I've seen the shift. There are lots of bootcamps popping up. It's actually pretty easy today to find an entry point and become a UX designer. And those bootcamps are great as a starting point. They give you a first toolkit and some methods that you can take, a good first understanding. But once you get out there and find your job, you find that reality is very different from your classroom experience. All of a sudden, you're going to be faced with way different challenges and questions that have not been discussed in your classrooms. And that can even start with the role that you have. It might not even be very clear what you're responsible for as a UX designer, or the methods and the steps that you have learned of needing to create personas and doing a lot of research. That's all going to be overruled because there's no time and budget to do any of this. I've seen a lot of UX designers, and I've been there myself as well, who are being pushed into the end of the problem-solving process. And that leaves you with, creative solutions, creating something, creating wireframes, creating visual solutions, but the whole decision-making process, that happens elsewhere. And it's not just that decisions are being made elsewhere, it's also you as a UX designer all of a sudden have a very, very small voice for the user overall to share. I want to quickly share a bit about my story. When I started, there weren't any boot camps at this point. I studied psychology and I got into the field of UX design, which back then didn't exist yet, so human-computer interaction. But I got really excited about merging the knowledge that I had about user behavior or human behavior and human perception with technology. And at that point, there were so many new technologies popping up, really exciting. It still is. And I was driven by making technology really easy to understand for users. That was my main motivation. And that might be a big motivation for a lot of you to get into UX. You might have seen the big Venn diagram. There's the business, there is technology, and there is the user. And it's an old Venn diagram, and it was shared with me back then as well. And I looked at it and I'm like, sure, yeah, there are these 3 bubbles and it's very important. But I saw my strong focus and my responsibility in only one of the bubbles, the user bubble. My role as a UX designer is to understand user needs and making sure that this is part of the product solution. But at the very beginning of my career, while I was out there and interviewing users and customers and learning so much and coming back with exciting ideas and even being part of the visualization part of the solution overall, I also had one barrier after another because there were so many other decision makers part of the overall product design process that always hit back. There is business reasons and technical reasons of why we couldn't do one or the other, or why the direction completely changed. And that's frustrating if you're out there and you feel like you're driven by that passion, you really want to improve something, make something better. You're putting a lot of time into collecting all that knowledge, and then there's only a fraction of the knowledge that is actually being used into the product design, and the outcome of it might be completely crappy or completely in the wrong direction. Yeah, not good. And to this day, I don't see that we actually have shifted that much. And to me, one of the reasons is actually the educational process that we have. Education, all the quick educations out there are focused on tools. But those tools, it's like if you are learning how to become a carpenter, yeah, it's great that you learn how to use specific tools. But if you don't know anything about building a house, if you don't understand the overall structuring, thinking 3D, thinking big picture, then there's only so much that you can do with your tools. Throughout my career, or at the beginning of my career, I saw myself being pushed more and more into the end of the problem-solving process, creating wireframes. And the bigger the industry actually became, the more UX designers we had on the market. UX design became a big thing at a lot of organizations, but I felt the more companies were talking about UX, the next step from there was actually how to make it more efficient. Like, we didn't really get more room, we got less room. Yes, there are all these UX designers now that are being hired, but the responsibilities that they have is like, how can we shortcut everything? You as a UX designer, you should have all the experience in the world. Just give me the best practices. Or we know that we just need to update that feature. So just create a wireframe for that. Create a solution for that. There's not a lot of room for us to actually help with problem definition. And this is what I call tactical design thinking. Tactical design means you are responsible for the small things. You are working on a specific project and you are being tasked with a specific problem that you're solving, and it's usually very executional. There's not a lot of room to explore. Even if you are lucky and you have a whole discovery process in there and you create some research, you're still doing tactical work if your work is very focused on just one single thing. And this is where the Venn diagram comes in again. So business, technology, and users. Yes, we need to understand users, but if your focus is only the user side, you're missing out. This is the big shift that I think needs to happen, and that I would also love to see more in the educational process, which is the strategic design thinking. And strategic design thinking means you're more on a big picture level. If you do any kind of design, specifically research work, you focus on overall problem definition. You really look into all the different areas, like what's the current situation, what are our customers struggling with. But then Venn diagram, it's not just the users or the customers that you would be focusing on. It's also the business, the market, the competitors, it's technology. You really get a good understanding of what's going on, what's the overall outcome. This is kind of the reason why we see product designers as latest big role, which I find product design, UX design, big overlap, who's doing what, who's responsible for what. So whatever you call yourself, it's still about the thinking process that you have. So strategic design thinking means you are interested in the overall experience, the overall underlying problems that we want to solve. You're defining the overall outcomes. And with that big picture thinking in mind of what does that mean for the organization, what other departments are affected by that, it's not just a project-specific thinking, but it's a bigger approach, a bigger thinking. So, how do we get there? There's tactical, there's strategic. If you want to have more impact as a UX designer, I'm telling you, you should move more into strategic design thinking. And here I have 5 specific steps or exercises that you can start doing to practice that kind of mindset. First thing, before you start working on a design solution, you should start asking a bunch of questions, especially why questions. You want to understand the problem. There needs to be a clear problem definition. You want to understand the desired outcomes, both for the business and for the customers. And you want to understand how we're going to measure these desired outcomes. So the first exercise for your next project that you're going to start, just make these 3 different columns, or like list 3 core categories of questions where you get really, really clear about the problem that needs to get solved. What do we know about this problem? Then you get really, really clear about the desired outcome, again, both for the business and for the users. And then you get also really, really clear about measurements. I find if I start a project with that, with my clients, sometimes I get a very defensive reaction. So you want to practice the way how you ask these questions. These are not very easy questions. And for us as humans, it's very easy to jump to solutions. Very often, my clients approach me with a specific solution in mind. And yes, it's a solution to a problem, but the problem might actually be just the tip of the iceberg. These questions can become a little bit uncomfortable, but it's a good exercise, not only for you, but also for your team. And you can, like, if you don't get proper responses to any of these questions, or you feel like, oh my God, people feel really uncomfortable with me asking all these questions, just start by noting down assumptions. Just ask them to share any kind of knowledge that they have, or any kind of hypothesis or assumptions. If you start that conversation, it might actually become very clear to you and your team that there are specific knowledge gaps. There might be certain things that are missing, certain things where we're not ready yet. The more you start asking these questions, the more your teammates, the project manager, your managers overall will become familiar with that approach as well. So don't get frustrated if you don't get all the answers right away. But again, this is a very, very important first step for a successful outcome overall. We want to understand the whys before we can start to work on the hows. The next exercise is stakeholder interviews. And you might be familiar with that framework. For me, it's kind of like a routine, a starter for every project that I'm working on. But if you work in an organization, you can use stakeholder interviews also to create bonds and relationships. And you can do that by doing them on a regular basis, not just for a specific project. You can start with a specific project, but while you're interviewing other members from other organizations, so if you talk to sales, or you talk to marketing, you talk to call center agents, just try to gain a better understanding of what they're interested in, what their focus is, and how they measure success for themselves. And then try to create that relationship. Whenever you have something that is of relevance for these departments or these specific stakeholders, share it back with them. You could think about setting up some regular share out sessions on, let's say, like a monthly basis, where you share the key highlights of any kind of research that you did, or any kind of customer user feedback that you heard. You could also start to do little regular checkups where you invite different members from different organizations, a representative from sales, from marketing, from customer service, any kind of customer touch points to get their feedback, so that you start to actually work together. And the strategic thinking behind it is, again, the bigger picture. As an organization, you have a specific goal, and you're probably selling a specific product, a specific service. You always have to make sure that you are growing and evolving. That could mean gaining more customers, new customers, improving the features and functionalities. And while a lot of it might end up at your plate of actually the tactical task of doing it, like of executing specific design solutions, the bigger picture that drives these solutions is really thinking about what's working and what's not working currently with our customers. And you get there by interacting and building that relationship to other departments. That's how you get strategic thinking, and that's how you will also improve the impact that you can have as a UX designer. So use stakeholder interviews not just for a specific project, but also on a bigger scale, on a more regular approach. The third exercise is getting better with your business acumen. If you want to have more impact on your business, you have to start talking that way. I very often get questions in my mentoring sessions about how do I help my team to see the importance of user research? They're jumping way too quickly ahead to solving specific problems, or they're so focused on a feature, but we don't even know the underlying issues that we have. And if you start talking about the methods, if you just pull out your toolkit and you open up your box and, we should do a survey, we should do interviews, we should do customer journey map. Like if you pull out tools, that in their mind, all they're hearing is time and money. It's going to take us way too long. It's going to push everything out and it's going to make everything way too expensive. We can't afford to do that. Like, no, let's skip it. So you have to learn to phrase things differently and to phrase it in a business perspective. What are the risks for the business? What are other opportunities for the business? What are missed opportunities if you act or move too quickly, or if you go into a specific direction without exploring another direction? And in order to learn how to speak better or think better with business, you can start using strategic framework. You may have heard about the business model canvas, and I do have to say it is a pretty complex canvas if your day-to-day work is not necessarily business strategy, which for most UX designers it isn't. And I'm not saying that you need to use the business model canvas and start every project by filling out the canvas, but you can use this model as a personal exercise for yourself. So whenever you start a new project, you can answer some of these boxes. Not all these boxes are all that relevant to every project, but it helps you to think about some of the connections and think about certain questions. What is actually our business model behind it? How are we going to create revenue with this specific solution? Are there any specific partnerships that we need to be aware of? And if there are partnerships, what are their interests? What are their goals? A certain aspect of the business model canvas is what you do as a UX designer anyways. It's really understanding the different audience groups, their needs, and the value proposition. Like, how are we actually providing value to our customers and make it better? So if you're already skilled with it, you can use the business model canvas to fill it out with your team together. But as a very first exercise, I would recommend to really just use it as just a practice sheet for yourself. Take the model and then for every project, fill out as much information as possible as you can. In any areas where you have blanks, there might be certain questions that are popping up, and you can go back to your stakeholders, to your project managers, to your manager to ask some of these questions. It just helps you to think from different perspectives, really honing into that Venn diagram, the 3 different circles. The fourth exercise or tactic that I'm going to recommend is the outcomes before you define your specific tasks. If you start your next project and you're being asked to improve this landing page, we need to increase sales, so we need to improve the landing page, come up with some ideas. Don't just go out there and start executing and designing different versions for landing pages, but be really clear and specific about the outcomes that you want to or that the project team wants to see accomplished. And again, it's outcomes for the business and it's outcomes for the user. So for the business, why do we need to improve the landing page? What's the desired outcome that we want to accomplish? And it might be we need to see more signups, or we want to have more sales calls. So those outcomes you want to A, define, and then B, also put measurements in place. So if it's more sales calls, okay, so how do we measure that? Is there already a measurement in place? Can we agree to review the numbers on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis, just to have something to track? If you do that approach, you can also ask for specific numbers and measurements that are already in place and look at the history. What has been working? What has not been working? What is the data that we have telling us? That, again, helps you to think differently, but it might also help the overall team to actually think about different measurements and different methods that they have to put in place. Again, that's where you as a UX designer will have more impact, because it's not just the final design that is relevant, it's the questions that you're asking. Questions for the customers as an outcome. It's like, if you want to improve that landing page, what is the desired outcome for our customers? And this might be tied to business problems or business outcomes as well. Like, as a business outcome, we want to make sure that we get the right customers. We have so many people currently calling the sales team that are not even, they're just not the right customers. So we have to make sure on our landing page that we're attracting the right customers and that we're deferring the wrong customers. So anybody who is not a good fit should immediately see that they're not a good fit and leave. Then how do we measure that? UX measurements are usually way more tricky than business KPIs, because you can't just put a bounce rate as a measurement for this specific issue on it, for example, because a high bounce rate might actually be a very good outcome in this specific case. It might mean that all of a sudden the divide is way clearer and all the people who wrongly came to your landing page are leaving because they understood immediately, it's not for me. That's good. That's what you want. So bounce rate might not be a good measurement for you, but measurements could be, very often it should include some kind of a qualitative measurement as well, like a little rating, but it could also just mean checking in with your sales team and see, did the quality of the sales call improve, right? So that's the fourth exercise, is starting to define the outcomes, including measurements, before you move into tasks. And then the very last exercise that I have is focusing on cross-functional work. I find this is best to be done by doing working sessions, workshops, or collaborative meetings. And it helps you, similar to what I said to the regular stakeholder interviews, it just helps you to create connections and bonds. What do I mean by that specifically? As a UX designer, you are probably good and also keen on solving problems and creating solutions. But UX design is not a one-man show. You need input from other people and other teams. There's the users for sure, but there's also other departments, again, the business side, there is technology, working sessions to invite all those people into the design process can be not just helpful to create bonds and relationships, but it gives you so much valuable information that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. I find super helpful workshops are customer journey map workshops, which are being done in cross-functional teams and groups where you can really discuss the customer journey from so many different angles. You could even use that to create an ideal customer journey map to get inputs from all the different visions that are floating out there. The other one is assumption map workshop, where you collect knowledge, again, from different departments. What does sales see? What does marketing see? What does your social media expert see? What does the customer call representative C, like what are all the inputs and knowledge snippets that are floating around that we have, and where are gaps? What questions do we have in general that we haven't actually figured out? Where is additional research or data needed to help us gain a good understanding? And then a third workshop that I often use is the design thinking workshop. Throughout the process of creating solutions, you can have a session where you actually start with problem definition and then create the problem space. How might we questions? And then come up with ideas for solutions. The more you involve other stakeholders and other departments, the more they understand what it is that you're doing, the more they understand the importance of looking and really using user knowledge in there as well, and the more relevant you become as a person, and again, your impact will grow. To quickly recap, those 5 exercises that I mentioned is start by asking why when you start your project. You can use those 3 categories: problem definition, desired outcome, and measurements. Second exercise, setting up regular stakeholder interviews and share-out sessions. Third exercise, using a strategic framework like the business model canvas just to get familiar with business acumen. Fourth exercise, defining the desired outcomes, including the measurements, before you start working on your designs. And then the 5th exercise is using cross-functional workshop sessions wherever you see a good fit for it. I hope you can make use of one or the other exercise here and slowly evolve and improve with your strategic thinking, and therefore also improving with the overall impact that you have as a UX designer. I think UX design is still a very, very important area that won't be taken over that quickly by AI. How we call it, how we talk about ourselves, that might change, but the value of really bringing all that knowledge together, that will not change. That's always going to stay important. And that's it for today. Thank you for listening. If you want to get more tips on collaboration, check out my website, designforoutcome.com. Sign up for my newsletter to get tips on collaboration and improvements on the design process. See you next time.